white as snow.
Alright, today we're going to teach Zerotheism for kids. Now this is Thor, my co-host.
Hey
Thor,
guys. What's up, kids?
if you go on YouTube, Thor's been working, we have a show called Atheism Reviews where we review videos of people debating in the street or topics that have controversy between science and religion. So we're going to talk about today is in the old days, people used to teach children this, which is the Bible, which we're going to explain comes from Egypt, everything in there. It also parts from Greek mythology and from Iraq. Now this is the modern way of looking at things. Everybody see out there's three people here that have little letters, A, B, and C. So if you put three people together, we're going to have to come up with reactions. So let's say these two are friends, A and B, and they invite that third person, C, into their house or this now takes place on a big country estate with lakes and ponds. And if they invite C in there, there's going to be reactions. So some friends might go and react with C, and some friends might, A and B and C might react, or B and C might react. And so this is all takes place according to, not instead of God's energy, but Gibbs energy, which is the energy of chemistry. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Normally I do guest lectures at universities, and we teach. So here's a lecture at Northern Illinois University where I taught mechanical engineers about 2 years ago. And you see this little ball and ring right here?
Huh?
Everybody see this right here?
I see it.
This is called the ball and ring experiment. Now in 1736 they didn't understand how heat worked. So they didn't understand how the ring could go through the ball. And then if you heat it up, for some reason the ring wouldn't go through the ball, and they couldn't understand it. So Voltaire was there. He was one of the famous thinkers back in the 18th century. He went there and he said that in Leiden University, this experiment would draw some 400 to 500 people to watch this, because they didn't understand if this was the energy of science or if it was the energy of God. So here's the experiment. I'll do it for you right now. You take the ball first, which is it's made of atoms and electrons, or what we talked about before, fermions, which is matter. Your question?
Can you touch it?
Touch it, yeah. Everybody can touch it first. Just so things you can touch are fermions. That means they have they have what's called half integral spin. And they're things like electrons and protons. Now things you can feel, like everybody can feel the cold air, right? That would be bosons. That's the force. So this is the bosons are going to heat the copper. So the reason we're doing this is when you jump each one of these stories in here are based on older mythologies from Greece and Egypt. So when you switch over to the new way of looking at things, sometimes you think you can make your own rules up and you think you can have a new morality. But you have to remember that all of us are still governed by the rules of the universe. So this is one of the rules that, how it's called Borges law, that when you heat things, they expand. Now we heat this for about a couple minutes. Now some people think that if you switch, this is called Gibbs, this is an example of energy. Not exactly, or this is an example of Gibbs energy. The air is reacting with the carbon dioxide in here, the methane that's in here, and it's creating combustion. So this is the same energy that when people react together, you just can't see it as much. This is an example of bosons.
Is that brass?
Yeah, the brass are covered. So now we've heated it for about a minute. It doesn't go through. See how it changed? No, the heat went in here, released photons, which are released the bosons. The force that you can feel. Remember, the fermions are things you can touch, like fur. And bosons are the things you can feel, like heat. Everybody can feel the heat if they put their hands around this. So now, if we take it, we cool this down, we put in water, their heat goes from the metal into the water. Now it cools down. and it goes through. So people used to think this was magic in the old days. But now we understand that this is just one of the rules of heat. Now we're going to jump into the lecture. Does anybody know what this symbol is? What is it? Cross?
It's the it's like a sign of God or a church on front of the building.
What is it?
You know when God died, they put a big cross there.
Oh, okay. Good answer. So we're going to explain. Thor and I are going to explain where this cross comes from before it was written into Christianity. Before this was written into Christianity, it comes from a star formation called the Northern Crux. And the sun, they used to believe the earth was flat, and that the sun would, at the end of its cycle, towards December, would die when it reached there was a star constellation in the sky called the Northern Crux. And when the sun reached that position, they'd use that as a model of the death of the universe. And then the sun would be reborn again the next year. And that got rewritten into the story of Jesus dying on the cross.
Excuse me?
Mm-hmm.
Did you know you can't play with crosses?
Play with crosses? Oh, they're fun, yeah.
Yeah.
You can't? Because they're dangerous? So now we're going to teach you...
Because God will give you a curse.
Curse? Okay, so we're going to explain that. We're going to teach you a new morality, that instead of God giving you a curse, that would be, if you do something wrong, it's what's called an endergonic reaction. So an endergonic act means you did something wrong and it absorbs energy from the universe. The following diagram gives a quick overview of this conception of endergonic acts taking the place of something being cursed, as they would say in the olden days, by way of what's called natural morality, or classically what's known as the appeal to nature argument, initiated by Aristotle as a basis for his system of ethics, expanded on by John Mill in the 19th century in his essay on nature, according to which, in modern terms, whether in a cell or in a society, endergonic reactions or unnatural processes are coupled to exergonic, that is, natural reactions and processes, such that exergonic drives endergonic in a coupled manner, somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 1, which equates to the premise of change in the universe. So this is the new way. These are the new crosses right here. This is Charles Darwin, and he's, instead of thinking in his day about 150 years ago, they told him when he was a child that God created him, or humans, on a specific day about 10,000 years ago. And he didn't believe that because he studied fossil records, which showed that humans have a similar shape to monkeys, and monkeys have a similar shape to walking fish, and walking fish have a similar shape to tubers in the ocean, and these have a similar shape to bacteria.
What is tubers?
Tubers is like a worm. In more detail, 0.2 million years ago, somewhere in the location of the East African Rift Valley, humans came into existence in their present geometrical form as 26-element molecules, which evolved from Old World monkeys, who existed 30 million years ago, defined as 24-element molecular forms, which in turn evolved from fish, or walking fish, who crawled out of the ocean 0.7 billion years ago, defined as 22-element molecular forms, who in turn evolved over time from smaller geometrical molecular forms, such as pre-aquatic worms, defined as 18-element molecular geometries, which in turn evolved from prokaryote bacteria that existed 3.85 billion years ago, which evolved from earlier forms going back in time, metamorphosizing, as Goethe would call it, from smaller molecular forms and molecules, originating 13.7 billion years ago from the event known as the Big Bang, deriving from fermions and bosons. So Charles Darwin studied the bones of different species, and he came up with a theory called evolution, which means that instead of God coming down with his magic wand and poof, creating everything at once in the Garden of Eden, things change form over time. And they start here and they branch off. So this could be what Darwin thought was the original form of life. It was a warm pond. The light came down and fire, like we were just doing here, and heated up the pond, and things like frogs started jumping out. They're little animals. And they branched off. And so we're up here in one of these branches, the human branch. The method Thor and I are going to teach you today is called the Hypatia-Erasmus teaching method. And the first part is that instead of teaching children that fables are true, which is saying that this cross right here is true, we're going to teach you that the story of the cross is a fable that mixed in with religion and mythology. So it's three things together.
Jesus Michael, but why is he finding progress?
Okay, so this means the point, everything that Thor and I teach you, we want you to be able to think and use we're teaching you to be free thinkers. So if we tell you something that you don't believe, you can get on the internet, you can look it up. So you don't have to believe what we say. Darwin is a thinker and he uses his mind. Now if you choose not to think, then you become a closed-minded person. So a lot of people who are religious, they believe that everything that happened here is true. And that means they throw their brain in the trash, but they're happy. See how there's a smile on his face? So you can...
But why?
A lot of people say that, they used to say that religion, if you get too much of it, it's like doing drugs. And drugs are bad. So if you get too much of religion, you can't... We're going to teach you a new religion that's more compatible with science. So Darwin thinks and he gets a new morality system. But this guy doesn't choose to think. He just wants to believe that everything is written in here. So he stays happy and he prays a couple times a day and he keeps everything going. But sometimes if you don't keep up with modern knowledge, then your brain will start to shrink and you won't be able to make good choices. So the Hypatia-Erasmus method is, we're going to teach you that fables should be taught as fables, myths as myth, miracles as poetic fancies. She says that if you don't do this, then you get these stories stuck in your head, and only later in your years, when you turn 30, 40, or 50, that it takes to get those stories they taught you when you were a child out of your head because you believe them. And Erasmus is one of the last people said to know everything. He's one of the last universal geniuses. And he says you must acquire the best knowledge first. Thor and I are what's called Zerotheists. That means we don't believe that Thomas Jefferson, for example, came from the hand of God coming down 10,000 years ago and pooping him into existence. There's three things that we're going to teach you throughout the lecture. First one is that all the modern religions are based on mythologies. So, in particular, we're going to teach you that the Bible, which is the religion that Christians believe, and the Quran, which is the religion that the Muslims believe, and then the Hinduism, which is the religion that people in India believe, are all based on Egyptian mythology. So we're going to teach you that. And that's the point number one. Now you have to, point number two is fossil evidence. Any question?
When are we going to do manhood evolution?
This is start of evolution right here. The person who invented, remember this slide right here? This guy is Charles Darwin. Now when he started reading about this, that maybe God didn't create you on a certain day 10,000 years ago, he started reading to see if there was somebody who had this idea before him. And he found this guy, Goethe, which is the same guy that wrote this book here. You see the name, G-O-E-T-H-E, his name is Goethe. And before he wrote this in 1809. In 1784, people believed that humans didn't evolve from earlier forms. And the reason they said was that humans had a special bone in their jaw called the intermaxillary bone. And they said that animals had this bone, but humans didn't have the bone. So Goethe started studying fossils. They compared to fossils of dogs, and horses and animals and humans and monkeys. And he found that humans have the same bone called the intermaxillary bone, and he discovered that in 1784. And that gave Charles Darwin evidence to build up this evolution theory. So now we're at point number 3. So the first reason here to become, so instead of believing the universe is made by God's power, we're teaching you the universe is made by Gibbs energy. So the first reason is that, as we'll show, the religions come from Egyptian mythology. So the second reason is evidence. If you study the bones between animals and humans, you'll find that they evolved over time. And so that contradicts with the Bible that says that humans were created on a certain day 4,000 years ago, according to the Bible. Now the third point that conflicts with religion is called determinism. If you read in all these religions, Islam and Christianity, they'll say that you have a soul and that your choices come from your soul, which is inside your heart. The new way of looking at things is that what's called determinism, which we're going to show. We're going to do the determinism experiments here. So Albert Einstein, he sort of believed in God. He believed that God equals nature. So anytime you see a plant growing, or you see the experiment we just did where the ball expands, he believed that that was God working through nature. And that's partly correct, but there's you have to be very particular with your words so you don't end up making mistakes. So he says that everything is determined by forces. Remember, red color equals the bosons, and then these forces have control over everything we do, and everything is determined for the star, for humans, vegetables, and for cosmic dust. We all dance to a mysterious tune, in tune by a visible piper off in the distance. So that's called determinism. So here's the deterministic experiment. So this, let's say this was the start of the universe. Everything was created over here by, in the old days they used to thank God. Now we think that there's some kind of, either the universe is created at once or it's moving around continuously. Nobody's decided yet. So this would be called first cause. And let's say you think each one of these dominoes is a little point that determines cause and effect, and it affects each person. So you can look back, when you think about things that happen to you, since you've grown up, you can always trace it back to these dominoes. So if we take the first one down here, this is initial cause, this is final cause. Everything in the universe works according to what's called determinism. So one of the repercussions is, the old days they would say, as we'll show, the Egyptians used to believe that when you reach your end, when you stop moving on the earth, they would take your soul out, which you know how you said that if you, what did you say before, Sarah, about doing wrong?
You get cursed by Jesus.
Oh yeah, if you get cursed by Jesus. So the Egyptians used to believe that if you did something wrong, your soul would become heavy, and they would take your soul out and put it in a scale, and if it was too heavy, then you beat by the crocodile and you go into a fiery pit. So the new way, as we're going to show, is that the will.
So the fire takes his soul out. So fire takes his soul out. They take your soul out, and they used to believe that a bird would fly up into the afterlife, up in the sky, and then they would measure it. If it was a good soul, then you'd go to heaven. If it was a bad soul, then you'd go to hell. So we're going to explain the new way of understanding that. Hell. So where the devil is.
So now we understand, instead of thinking about soul, we still believe in that word a little bit because we haven't found a new word to replace it, but we think about will. So this is Schopenhauer, he's a philosopher. He was the first atheist in Germany that publicly said he was an atheist. So atheist means someone that doesn't believe in God. But as you see, its word is a real, it has a bad stereotype in America. So the word we're using is called Zerotheist. That means you believe in fermions and bosons and zero gods. And you also believe there's a rhythm and rhyme to the universe. So when you go out to a party and dancing, we believe that there's some kind of connection to that movement with Andromeda Galaxy, which is our nearest galaxy. Everything moves together.
So want to explain bosons and fermions one more time?
Oh yeah, I got the bigger slide, but just this one slide here. So this is the new way we understand will. You've been You can do what you will in the world, but you can't make up your own rules. So once the will gets into you from these two forces, then you end up making choices.
And do you need God for any of this that you're talking about?
No, so this is the new upgrade for this is what's called. So instead, every time you see the G, you think of this as this is Willard Gibbs. He's the first American to go into the PhD in engineering. He went to Yale, and he's considered the smartest American. So there are 700 equations in there that explain how instead of thinking about God, they think about Gibbs energy.